When single dad Ethan Walker opened his front door that October evening, expecting a simple blind date, he never imagined the whispered words that would change everything. "My kids are in the car." What started as nervous butterflies transformed into a life-or-death situation involving stalking hidden GPS trackers and a dangerous ex-husband who'd stop at nothing to maintain control. This is the story of how one man's compassion turned a first date into a rescue mission that would save an entire family. Stay with me until the end of this incredible journey and comment your city below so I can see how far this story has traveled around the world. The October wind carried the scent of fallen leaves through the suburban streets of Millbrook as Ethan Walker stood before his bathroom mirror, adjusting his collar for the third time in 5 minutes. His reflection stared back tired brown eyes, stubble. He'd forgotten to shave completely, and the kind of worry lines that came from 3 years of single parenthood. At 34, dating felt like learning a foreign language he'd once been fluent in. "Dad, you look weird," came a voice from the doorway. Ethan turned to see his 8-year-old son Marcus leaning against the frame, chocolate smeared across his cheek from the ice cream Ethan had bribed him with earlier. The boy's sandy hair stuck up at odd angles, defying the laws of physics and parental authority alike. "Thanks for the confidence boost, buddy," Ethan said, ruffling his son's hair. "Remember, Mrs. Patterson will be here any minute to watch you. Be good, okay?" Marcus rolled his eyes with the dramatic flair only children could master. "I'm always good. You're the one going on a date with a stranger from the internet." "It's not the internet, it's—" Ethan stopped himself. "How did you explain workplace matchmaking to an 8-year-old? Sarah from accounting set this up. Hannah seems really nice." The truth was, Ethan knew almost nothing about Hannah Miller. Beyond the basics, she was 31, worked as a nurse at Millbrook General, and had recently moved to town. Sarah had been annoyingly persistent about the setup, insisting they were perfect for each other, with the confidence of someone who'd never experienced the awkwardness of a first date in their life. The doorbell rang, and Ethan's stomach performed an Olympic-level gymnastics routine. Mrs. Patterson's arrival meant there was no backing out now. The elderly woman bustled in with her usual efficiency, armed with crossword puzzles and an endless supply of patience for Marcus's energy. "Have a wonderful time, dear," she said, settling into the living room chair she'd claimed as her own during previous babysitting sessions. "Don't rush back on my account." Ethan checked his watch, 6:47 p.m. Hannah was due to arrive at 7, and punctuality had always been one of his anxious tendencies. He straightened the throw pillows on the couch, moved a stack of Marcus's homework from the coffee table, and wondered for the 100th time why he'd agreed to this dinner at his house instead of meeting at a restaurant like normal people. The plan was simple. Hannah would pick him up, they'd drive to Romano's downtown, share some pasta and conversation, and he'd either have a nice evening or a good story to tell Marcus about why Daddy was staying single forever. Simple, controlled, safe. At exactly 7 o'clock, headlights swept across his front window. Ethan's heart rate spiked as he watched a silver Honda Civic pull into his driveway. Through the passenger window, he caught a glimpse of blonde hair and what looked like a warm smile. So far, so good. He opened the door before she could knock, not wanting to seem too eager, but also not wanting to keep her waiting. The woman standing on his porch was undeniably beautiful, shoulder-length blonde hair framing delicate features, bright blue eyes that seemed to hold secrets, and a nervous energy that mirrored his own. "Ethan?" she asked, though her voice carried an odd tension. "That's me," he replied, managing what he hoped was a charming smile. "You must be Hannah. You look lovely." She did look lovely, but there was something else, a tightness around her eyes, the way she kept glancing over her shoulder toward the street. Before he could analyze it further, she stepped closer and spoke in a whisper so quiet he almost missed it. "My kids are in the car." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. His smile faltered as confusion washed over him. Sarah hadn't mentioned children. Hannah hadn't mentioned children. And why were they in the car? Why was she whispering, "I'm sorry, what?" he asked, certain he'd misheard. Hannah's eyes darted to the street again before meeting his. "My kids, Emma and Jake, they're in my car. I couldn't find a babysitter and I almost canceled, but..." She paused, her voice dropping even lower. "I really needed to get out tonight. I know this is weird. I know this ruins everything, but..." Hey, slow down," Ethan said, his natural instinct to comfort overriding his confusion. He could see genuine distress in her eyes, now something deeper than embarrassment about bringing children to a date. "It's okay. Kids are great. I have one myself." Relief flooded her features so quickly, it was almost startling. "Really? You're not angry? Why would I be angry?" Ethan stepped aside, gesturing toward his house. "Why don't you bring them in? We can order pizza, make it a family evening. Marcus would probably love the company." Hannah's eyes filled with tears so suddenly that Ethan felt his chest tighten. She looked toward the car, then back at him as if weighing some impossible decision. "Are you sure I don't want to impose? This isn't how dates are supposed to go." "Forget how they're supposed to go," Ethan said, and he meant it. Something was wrong here, something beyond an awkward childcare situation. Every parental instinct he possessed was screaming that this woman needed help, not judgment. "Let's just focus on having a good evening. All of us." Hannah nodded, wiping her eyes quickly. "I'll get them. They're probably wondering what's taking so long." As she walked toward the car, Ethan noticed how she moved, constantly checking her surroundings, shoulders tense with hypervigilance. He'd seen that posture before during his brief stint as a social worker after college. It was the walk of someone who'd learned to expect danger. The car doors opened and 2 children emerged. Emma appeared to be about 10, with her mother's blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail and clothes that looked hastily thrown together. Jake was younger, maybe 6, clutching a stuffed dinosaur and staying close to his sister's side. Both children moved with the same careful awareness as their mother. "Emma, Jake, this is Ethan," Hannah said, her voice artificially bright. "He's very nice, and he has a little boy named Marcus who lives here." Emma studied Ethan with the serious expression of a child forced to grow up too quickly. "Is Marcus our age?" "He's 8. Ethan replied, crouching down to Emma's eye level. "Right between you two. He's inside with Mrs. Patterson, who makes the best chocolate chip cookies in the world." Jake's grip on his dinosaur loosened slightly. "What kind of dinosaur does Marcus like?" "Well, last week he was obsessed with velociraptors, but this week it's all about triceratops. He changes his mind a lot." "I like triceratops too," Jake whispered, the first genuine smile Ethan had seen from any of them. "Perfect. Come on, let's go meet him." And as they walked toward the house, Ethan caught Hannah's arm gently. "Everything okay? You seem nervous," she finished quickly. "First date jitters, and bringing kids along makes everything more complicated." It wasn't just nervousness, but Ethan didn't push. Whatever was happening, Hannah and her children needed somewhere safe to be tonight, and his house could provide that much at least. Mrs. Patterson took the arrival of 3 additional people in stride, gathering her things with practiced efficiency. "I'll head home then, unless you need me to stay." "We've got it covered," Ethan assured her. "Thanks for coming on short notice." After she left, the house felt simultaneously too small and too quiet. Marcus emerged from his room like a curious cat drawn by the sound of new voices. The introduction between the children was a masterclass in childhood diplomacy, cautious, circling, careful evaluation, And finally, Jake's dinosaur, serving as the perfect icebreaker. "Want to see my room?" Marcus asked, after determining that Jake's knowledge of prehistoric creatures was acceptable. "I have a whole collection of fossils." Emma looked to her mother for permission, another small sign that these children had learned to be careful about everything. Hannah nodded, and soon all three kids were thundering up the stairs, their laughter echoing through the house. For the first time since opening his door, Ethan and Hannah were alone. "I'm sorry," she said immediately. "This is not how I planned tonight to go. Sarah probably told you I was normal." "Sarah told me very little, actually," Ethan replied, settling onto the couch and gesturing for her to join him. "And for what it's worth, normal is overrated. Can I get you something to drink? Coffee, wine, juice box?" Hannah's laugh was genuine this time, and Ethan felt something in his chest relax. "Coffee sounds perfect. It's been a long day." As he moved to the kitchen, Ethan found himself stealing glances at Hannah. She'd shed her coat, revealing a simple blue sweater that brought out her eyes, but she still carried that tension in her shoulders. She was beautiful in an understated way, but it was her obvious love for her children that really caught his attention. The way she'd positioned herself where she could hear them upstairs, how she'd relaxed only after ensuring they were happy and safe. "So," he said, returning with 2 mugs of coffee. "Tell me about Emma and Jake. They seem like great kids." Hannah's face lit up in a way that transformed her completely. "They are. Emma's incredibly smart, too smart sometimes. She's in 5th grade but reading at high school level. And Jake, he's my sensitive one. He sees everything, feels everything deeply." "How long have you been in Millbrook?" The light in her eyes dimmed slightly. "About 6 months. We moved here from Denver." "Big change. What brought you here?" Hannah took a long sip of coffee, and Ethan got the distinct impression she was buying time to formulate an answer. "Fresh start," she finally said. "Sometimes you need to leave everything behind and begin again." There was a story there, probably not a happy one, but Ethan didn't press. He understood the need for fresh starts better than most. "Well, Millbrook's a good place for new beginnings," he said instead. "Small enough that people care about each other, big enough that you can find privacy when you need it." "What about you, born and raised here?" "Born here, left for college, and a few years of thinking I was too good for small-town life, then came crawling back when Marcus's mom and I split up." The words came out easier than usual. Maybe it was Hannah's obvious struggles that made his own seem less shameful. "Turns out, this place grows on you. Marcus's mom lives in California now. She sends birthday cards and Christmas presents calls once a month. She's not a bad person, just not built for the day-to-day reality of parenthood." Ethan shrugged a gesture that had taken 3 years of therapy to perfect. "Her loss, Marcus's gain. We do just fine on our own." Hannah studied him with an intensity that made him slightly uncomfortable. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "I don't know, someone more." She gestured vaguely. "Most single dads I've met are either desperately looking for a replacement mom or completely bitter about their ex-wives. And I'm neither." "You're neither. You seem content, like you've made peace with your life." Ethan considered this. Content might be too strong a word. But I'm not angry anymore, and I'm not looking for someone to fix my life. If someone wants to share it, great. If not, Marcus and I will keep doing what we're doing." From upstairs came the sound of running feet and delighted shrieks. Hannah tensed immediately, but Ethan held up a calming hand. "That's the sound of kids having fun," he said. "In this house, running and moderate screaming are considered normal. I'm not used to them being so free," Hannah admitted. We've been living quietly for so long. Another piece of the puzzle. Ethan was beginning to form a picture of a woman running from something, trying to build a life while looking over her shoulder. The urge to ask direct questions was strong, but experience with Marcus had taught him that sometimes people needed to tell their stories in their own time. Kids need to run and scream sometimes, he said gently. It's how they process the world. Hannah nodded, but her eyes remained fixed on the ceiling, as if she could see through to where her children played. Emma hasn't had friends over in almost a year. Jake still has nightmares sometimes. The admission hung between them, heavy with implication. Ethan felt his protective instincts sharpen. Whatever had driven Hannah and her children to Millbrook, it had left scars. Nightmares about what? He asked softly. Hannah's coffee mug trembled slightly in her hands. Loud voices, doors slamming, someone being hurt. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. Domestic violence. That's why Hannah moved with hypervigilance, why she whispered about her children being in the car, why the kids seemed simultaneously starved for normalcy and wary of it. Hannah, Ethan said carefully, are you safe now? Her eyes snapped to his wide with something between fear and relief. What do you mean, so? I mean whatever you were running from. Are you safe from it here? For a moment he thought she might tell him. Her mouth opened, words seemed to form, but then the sound of children's feet on the stairs interrupted them. Emma, Jake, and Marcus tumbled into the living room, faces flushed with excitement. Mom, can we stay for dinner? Emma asked. Marcus has a treehouse, and he said we could see it tomorrow if we're still friends. We're definitely still friends, Jake announced, clutching a new dinosaur that Ethan recognized as one of Marcus's favorites. Marcus let me borrow Rex. Did he now? Ethan looked at his son, pride swelling in his chest. Marcus had never willingly shared Rex with anyone. They don't have any dinosaurs at their house, Marcus explained with the solemnity of someone correcting a great injustice. Jake needs Rex to protect him from bad dreams. The words hit the room like a small bomb. Jake's face crumpled. Emma stepped protectively in front of her brother, and Hannah went pale. Only Marcus remained oblivious to the minefield he'd just wandered into. It's okay, Hannah said quickly, but her voice was too bright, too forced. Jake doesn't have bad dreams anymore. I do sometimes, Jake whispered, contradicting his mother with the brutal honesty of childhood. But maybe Rex will help. Ethan felt something fierce and protective rise in his chest. This little boy, clutching a stuffed dinosaur like a talisman against whatever monsters haunted his sleep, had just broken his heart completely. You know what? Ethan said, dropping to Jake's level. Rex is magic. He's protected Marcus from bad dreams for 3 years. I bet he'd love to help protect you, too. Jake's eyes widened. Really, he's magic. The most magic dinosaur in all of Millbrook, Ethan confirmed solemnly. But the magic only works if you really truly believe in it. I believe, Jake said immediately, clutching Rex tighter. Hannah was crying silently, tears streaming down her face as she watched this exchange. Emma had moved to her mother's side, small hand resting on Hannah's arm, in a gesture that spoke of too much experience comforting adults. Hey, Ethan said, standing and addressing all of them. Who's hungry? I was thinking we could order from Tony's Pizza. They have the best pepperoni in 3 counties. Can we get extra cheese? Marcus asked, immediately distracted by the prospect of food. We can get whatever you want, Ethan replied. This is a celebration. What are we celebrating? Emma asked suspiciously. New friends, Ethan said simply. New friends are always worth celebrating. as he pulled out his phone to call Tony's. Ethan caught Hannah's eye. She mouthed thank you, with such gratitude that he felt his throat tighten. Whatever hell this family had escaped, they deserved every moment of peace he could give them. While they waited for the pizza, the evening took on an almost surreal quality. The children played with an intensity that spoke of long-suppressed need for normalcy. Marcus showed off his room, his toys, his books, while Emma and Jake absorbed everything with the hunger of children who'd been deprived of simple childhood pleasures. Hannah gradually relaxed, though Ethan noticed she still positioned herself where she could see the front window. When he brought this to her attention by closing the blinds, she flashed him a look of such relief that his suspicions crystallized into certainty. Someone was looking for them. Someone Hannah was afraid of. "The pizza should be here in 20 minutes, he announced, settling back onto the couch. "Perfect timing for you to tell me what's really going on." Hannah stiffened. "What do you mean?" "I mean, this isn't about a babysitter falling through. You're running from someone and you're scared they'll find you." Ethan kept his voice gentle but firm. "I'm not going to judge you, and I'm not going to turn you away. But if there's danger, I need to know what we're dealing with." The children's laughter drifted down from upstairs, a stark contrast to the tension in the living room. Hannah stared at her hands, and when she spoke, her voice was barely audible. "His name is Chase. Chase Morrison. He's my ex-husband, and he's been following us." The admission seemed to unlock something in her. Words began pouring out, years of fear and isolation spilling into Ethan's living room, like water through a broken dam. It started small, checking my phone, questioning where I'd been, who I'd talked to. Then it escalated. He needed to know everything, control everything. I couldn't work certain shifts because he didn't like my coworkers. I couldn't see friends because they were bad influences. I couldn't even choose what to make for dinner without his approval. Ethan listened without interrupting, his hands clenched in his lap to keep from reaching for her. The final straw was when he started targeting the kids. Emma came home from school upset about something, and when Chase demanded to know what was wrong, she couldn't explain it in a way that satisfied him. He made her stand in the corner for 2 hours writing, "I will communicate clearly," over and over until her hand cramped. "Jesus," Ethan breathed. That night I started planning our escape. It took me 4 months to save enough money, find a job here, arrange everything. We left while he was at work, I thought. Her voice broke. "I thought we'd finally made it." "But he found you." Hannah nodded, wiping her eyes. 3 weeks ago, I started seeing his car. Always at a distance, never close enough to be sure, but I know his license plate. I know the way he sits behind the wheel. Then yesterday, Emma said a man at her school asked the secretary questions about her. The description matched Chase perfectly. The pizza arrived, then interrupting their conversation, but not breaking the spell of trust Hannah had woven. As they gathered around Ethan's dining table, he watched the children's faces, seeing them with new eyes. Emma's premature maturity, Jake's careful way of checking his mother's reactions before expressing joy, these weren't just personality traits. They were survival mechanisms. "So what's the plan?" Ethan asked quietly, while the children debated the merits of different pizza toppings. "I don't know," Hannah admitted. "I've been thinking about running again, but Emma just started to make friends, and Jake loves his teacher. I don't want to keep uprooting them, but I don't know how to make it stop." "Have you contacted the police?" "I tried. Back in Denver, I filed reports, got a restraining order. Chase is smart. He's a financial advisor, well respected in the community. He never left physical evidence, never made direct threats. To the police, he looked like a concerned ex-husband trying to locate his children. What about here? Local law enforcement might be more responsive." Hannah laughed bitterly. "With what evidence? I've seen his car, but I can't prove it. A man asked questions at Emma's school. but the secretary didn't get his name. On paper, I look like a paranoid ex-wife keeping a father from his children. Ethan felt anger building in his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. Getting emotional wouldn't help Hannah or her children. What they needed was a plan. "Okay," he said finally. "We need to think about this strategically. If Chase is here, if he's watching, then running again just postpones the problem. You need to force his hand, make him do something that gives you real evidence." That sounds dangerous. "Everything about this situation is dangerous," Ethan pointed out. "At least this way, you control the circumstances." Hannah studied him with that intense gaze again. "Why are you helping us?" "You barely know me." The question caught Ethan off guard. Why was he helping? The smart thing would be to drive Hannah and her children home, wish them well, and go back to his uncomplicated life with Marcus. Instead, he was plotting strategy against a stalker he'd never met involving himself in a situation that could easily become dangerous. "Because someone needs to," he said finally. "Because kids shouldn't have to live in fear. Because you deserve better than spending your life looking over your shoulder." Hannah's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they seemed different tears of relief rather than despair. "Besides," Ethan added, attempting to lighten the mood, "I've always been a sucker for lost causes." "We're not lost," Emma said suddenly from across the table, proving that children heard far more than adults assumed. "We're just finding our way." "That's right, sweetheart," Hannah said, reaching over to squeeze her daughter's hand. "We're finding our way." The rest of the evening passed in a strange bubble of normalcy. They finished dinner, played board games, and when Jake fell asleep on the couch, clutching Rex, nobody had the heart to wake him. Marcus curled up beside his new friend, and Emma settled into the armchair, with a book looking more relaxed than she had all evening. As 9 o'clock approached, reality began to intrude. Hannah would need to take her children home back to whatever rental house or apartment they'd been hiding in. The thought of them leaving, of Hannah driving into the darkness while potentially being watched, made Ethan's stomach clench. "Stay," he said suddenly. Hannah looked up from where she'd been gently shaking Jake awake. "What?" "Stay here tonight. I have a guest room. Marcus has bunk beds. If Chase is watching your place, he'll expect you to come home. Let him wonder where you are." "Ethan, I can't ask you to." "You're not asking. I'm offering." He stood up, decision made. "Tomorrow we'll figure out a long-term plan. Tonight, everyone sleeps safely." Hannah looked around the room at Jake, still drowsy and clinging to Rex, at Emma, already half asleep over her book, at Marcus, who had somehow become a protective big brother in the space of a few hours. Then she looked at Ethan, really looked at him as if trying to see into his soul. "Okay," she whispered. "Yes, thank you." As they settled the children for the night, Jake and Marcus in the bunk beds, Emma in the guest room, Hannah taking the couch, despite Ethan's protests, the house felt different. Fuller. More alive than it had been in years. Ethan lay in his own bed, listening to the sounds of a house occupied by more than just him and Marcus. The soft whisper of unfamiliar breathing, the creak of floorboards, as Hannah moved quietly downstairs, the sense of other lives intersecting with his own. Tomorrow would bring complications. Questions about what came next, decisions about how involved he wanted to get in Hannah's fight. The practical realities of helping a woman and her children escape a dangerous situation. But tonight, in this moment, it was enough that they were safe. That 3 people who had been living in fear were sleeping peacefully under his roof. That sometimes, when you opened your door expecting one thing, life handed you something entirely different, something that mattered more than you ever could have imagined. Outside, the October wind continued to blow through the streets of Millbrook, carrying with it the scent of change and possibility. And somewhere in the darkness, a silver Honda Civic sat in Ethan Walker's driveway, no longer running from shadows, but finally, for one night at least, finding refuge in the light. The first fingers of dawn crept through Ethan's bedroom window, pulling him from a restless sleep filled with dreams of shadowy figures and children's cries. He'd spent most of the night listening to the unfamiliar sounds of his house sheltering more than just him, and Marcus, the soft rustle of Hannah moving restlessly on the couch. Jake's occasional whimper that would quiet when Rex was pulled closer. Emma's steady breathing from the guest room. Ethan padded downstairs in his pajamas and bare feet, expecting to find Hannah still asleep on the couch. Instead, he discovered her standing at the kitchen window, still in yesterday's clothes, coffee mug clutched in her hands like a lifeline. Her blonde hair fell in tangles around her shoulders, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked softly, not wanting to startle her. Hannah turned, offering a weak smile. "I kept thinking I heard cars. Every set of headlights made me wonder if it was him." She gestured toward the window with her mug. "Old habits. I've been checking windows and listening for engines for so long, I'm not sure I remember how to sleep through the night anymore." Ethan moved to the coffee maker, grateful she'd already started a pot. The familiar ritual of morning caffeine felt reassuring after the surreal events of the previous evening. "How long has it been? Since you felt really safe, I mean." 3 years, Hannah answered without hesitation. That's when the controlling behavior really started. Before that, there were warning signs I ignored, but 3 years ago was when I realized I was living with someone I didn't recognize anymore. The weight of her words settled between them like a stone dropped in still water. 3 years of hypervigilance of teaching her children to be afraid of running from a man who was supposed to love and protect them. "Tell me about him," Ethan said, settling against the counter with his coffee. "Not the abuse, I don't need those details. But who is he? What makes him tick?" Hannah considered this, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "Chase is methodical. Everything he does is calculated for maximum impact with minimum risk to himself. He's charming when he needs to be intimidating when charm doesn't work. He builds relationships with people in authority, police officers, judges, teachers, so when conflicts arise, they already see him as the reasonable one. Sounds like a sociopath." "I think he might be, or at least has sociopathic tendencies. He doesn't feel empathy the way normal people do, but he's incredibly good at mimicking it when it serves his purposes." Hannah's voice took on a clinical tone as if discussing a case study rather than the man who'd terrorized her family. "He genuinely believes he's entitled to control us. In his mind, we're his property, and our escape was theft." The sound of small feet on stairs interrupted their conversation. Jake appeared in the kitchen doorway, Rex clutched tightly in his arms, hair sticking up at impossible angles. "Mom," he said, voice thick with sleep and uncertainty. "Are we going home today?" Hannah's face transformed as she crouched to Jake's level, all traces of fear replaced by maternal warmth. "Good morning, sweetheart. We're going to figure out what comes next, okay? But first, how about some breakfast?" "Can I have pancakes?" Marcus said. "Ethan makes really good pancakes." Ethan laughed, despite the gravity of their situation. "Marcus has been talking me up, has he? I guess I better live up to the hype." He moved toward the refrigerator, grateful for a task that felt normal and achievable. "Chocolate chip or blueberry?" "Chocolate chip," Jake said immediately, then looked worriedly at his mother. "Is that okay, Mom?" The question, such a simple request for permission, that shouldn't have been necessary made Ethan's chest tighten. What kind of environment had these children lived in, where asking for chocolate chip pancakes required maternal approval? Chocolate chip sounds perfect, Hannah assured him, pressing a kiss to the top of his head. Why don't you go wake up Emma and Marcus? Tell them breakfast will be ready in 20 minutes. As Jake bounded back upstairs with renewed energy, Hannah turned to Ethan with gratitude shining in her eyes. Thank you. For the pancakes, for last night, for all of it. I know this isn't what you signed up for when Sarah set us up. Sarah's matchmaking skills are apparently more mysterious than any of us realized, Ethan said, pulling ingredients from the pantry, though I'm starting to think she knew exactly what she was doing. What do you mean? Ethan measured flour into a bowl, considering his words. Sarah's been trying to set me up for 2 years. She's introduced me to teachers, nurses, lawyers, marketing executives, all perfectly nice women who checked every box on paper. But she's never been pushy about it before. With you, she was relentless. Hannah frowned. You think she knew about Chase? I think Sarah knows more about her coworkers than she lets on. She mentioned you'd recently moved to town, needed to build a support network. She probably sensed you were running from something and thought I might be able to help. Are you angry that she manipulated the situation? Ethan paused his mixing, looking at Hannah seriously. Are you kidding? She introduced me to someone who needed help, someone brave enough to protect her children by starting over in a strange place. She probably figured that if anyone would understand single parenthood and starting fresh, it would be me. The sound of children's voices and thundering feet filled the house as Emma, Jake, and Marcus made their way downstairs. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller, but infinitely warmer, with all 5 of them crowded around the breakfast table. These are the best pancakes in the history of pancakes, Emma declared solemnly after her first bite. Jake, we need to learn this recipe. It's a family secret, Marcus announced importantly. Dad only teaches it to special people. Are we special people? Jake asked, with the earnestness only 6-year-olds could manage. Marcus looked at his father, then at Jake and Emma, then back at Ethan, with an expression far too mature for his 8 years. Yeah, he said finally. You're special people. Ethan felt his throat tighten again. In less than 24 hours, his son had gone, Kuman. From an only child to a protective big brother, opening his heart and home to 2 children who desperately needed both. After breakfast, while the children played in the backyard under Marcus's supervision, Hannah and Ethan sat at the kitchen table with fresh coffee and the weight of decisions that couldn't be postponed any longer. I've been thinking about what you said last night, Hannah began. About forcing Chase's hand. What did you have in mind? Ethan had spent the sleepless hours before dawn turning possibilities over in his mind. We need evidence. Real concrete proof that he's stalking you. The kind that even a charming financial advisor can't explain away. How do we get that without putting the kids at risk? We set a trap. Something that looks natural but actually documents his behavior. Ethan leaned forward, warming to his plan. You go about your normal routine work, grocery shopping, school pickup. But we add surveillance. Hidden cameras, maybe a GPS tracker on your car to see if he's following specific routes. Hannah shook her head. GPS trackers are expensive, and I wouldn't know how to set up surveillance equipment. I would. The simple statement hung between them, loaded with implication. Hannah stared at him, searching his face for something, doubt perhaps, or signs that he was making promises he couldn't keep. Ethan, this is serious. If Chase realizes what we're doing, then we make sure he doesn't realize it. Hannah, I'm not some naive guy playing hero. I did 2 years of social work after college, mostly with domestic violence cases. I've seen what men like Chase are capable of, and I've also seen how to stop them. What made you leave social work? Ethan was quiet for a moment, memories surfacing that he rarely allowed himself to examine. Burnout. Too many cases where the system failed, where women went back to their abusers because they had no other choice, where children got hurt, because we couldn't prove what everyone knew was happening. He met her eyes directly. But this is different. This is personal now. Through the kitchen window, they could see the children building an elaborate fort out of fallen leaves and patio furniture. Emma was directing the construction with architectural precision, while Jake and Marcus provided labor and enthusiasm. The scene was so perfectly normal, so beautifully innocent, that it only strengthened Ethan's resolve. "Okay," Hannah said finally. "What's the plan?" "First, we establish patterns. You've been avoiding certain places, changing routes, staying unpredictable to throw him off. Starting today, we create a routine. Same time to work, same grocery store, same route to pick up the kids from school. That feels like painting a target on my back." "It is in a way, but it's a controlled target. We'll have cameras positioned at key locations and I'll be close by. If Chase is really following you, a predictable routine will force him to expose himself." Hannah wrapped her arms around herself, unconsciously seeking comfort. "And if he does more than just follow? What if he approaches me or tries something with the kids? Then we call 911 immediately. But honestly, I don't think he will. Men like Chase prefer to operate in shadows to maintain plausible deniability. Direct confrontation isn't his style, you said so yourself." "You're right. He's more likely to try psychological warfare. Flowers at work with notes about how much he misses us. Gifts for the children left where I'll find them. Things that look romantic or parental to outsiders but feel threatening when you know the context." Ethan nodded grimly. "Perfect. Those kinds of gestures are exactly what we need on camera. The more evidence we collect, the stronger our case becomes." A crash from the backyard sent both adults rushing to the window, but it was only the leaf fort collapsing under the weight of too much architectural ambition. The children's laughter echoed across the yard as they began rebuilding with even grander plans. "They look happy." Hannah observed a note of wonder in her voice. "When's the last time you saw them play like that?" "I can't remember. We've been so focused on staying invisible, staying safe. I forgot that children need more than just physical security, they need joy." Ethan watched Marcus explaining the finer points of fort construction to his new friends and felt a fierce protectiveness that had nothing to do with obligation or charity. Somewhere in the space of 18 hours, these three people had become important to him in a way that defied logic. "Hannah, I need to ask you something. And I want you to be completely honest." She turned from the window, tension immediately creeping back into her shoulders. "What? Are you planning to run again? If this doesn't work, if we can't get enough evidence to stop Chase, will you take the kids and disappear?" The question clearly caught her off guard. She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it, considering her words carefully. 6 months ago, the answer would have been yes without hesitation, she said finally. Running was all I knew how to do, but watching Emma and Jake this morning, seeing them make friends, feeling what it's like to have someone in my corner. She paused, looking directly at him. "I don't want to run anymore, Ethan. I want to fight." Something that had been knotted tight in Ethan's chest since the previous evening finally loosened. Good. Because running only works temporarily. Eventually, you run out of places to go. So we fight. But what if we lose? Then we fight smarter next time. But I don't think we're going to lose. Hannah studied his face, and Ethan found himself hoping she saw whatever she was looking for. Why are you so confident? Because Chase has been playing this game on easy mode. He's been dealing with a scared, isolated woman who had no support system and no resources. That's not the case anymore. You think having one ally changes everything. I think having the right ally changes everything, Ethan corrected. And you've got more than just me now. You've got Marcus, who's already decided Emma and Jake are family. You've got Mrs. Patterson, who has opinions about everything and connections everywhere. You've got Sarah from accounting, who's invested in this relationship, working out. Chase might be methodical, but he's not prepared for a community that's decided to protect you. Hannah's eyes filled with tears, but for the first time since Ethan had met her, they seemed to be tears of hope rather than despair. Their planning session was interrupted by the sound of the front doorbell. Both adults froze, looking at each other with sudden anxiety. It was barely past 9 on a Saturday morning, too early for casual visitors, too late for emergencies. "Stay here," Ethan said quietly, moving toward the front of the house. "Ethan, what if it's not? Chase doesn't know where you are, remember. It's probably just a neighbor or a delivery." But as Ethan approached the front door, he could see through the side window that it wasn't a neighbor or delivery person. A man in an expensive suit stood on his porch, tall and lean, with carefully styled dark hair and the kind of practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. Everything about him screamed success and respectability, from his polished shoes to his confident posture. Ethan's blood ran cold as he realized who was standing outside his door. Chase Morrison had found them. The man raised his hand to ring the bell again, and Ethan could see a wedding ring glinting in the morning sunlight, a ring he apparently still wore despite being divorced. The gesture felt both possessive and manipulative, a visual reminder to anyone who saw him that he was a family man, a husband concerned about his loved ones. Ethan's mind raced through possibilities. How had Chase tracked them here? Had he been watching the house all night? Did he know Hannah and the children were inside, or was this a fishing expedition? From the kitchen came the sound of Hannah's sharp intake of breath. She'd followed him despite his instruction to stay put, and had seen Chase through the window. Her face had gone white, and she was backing away from the door, as if the man outside might somehow sense her presence through the walls. "Mom?" came Emma's voice from the backyard door. "What's wrong?" The children were coming inside, drawn by some sixth sense that adults had whenever the atmosphere shifted from safe to dangerous. Emma's question was followed by the sound of all 3 kids entering the kitchen, their happy chatter dying as they sensed the tension. Chase rang the doorbell again, longer this time, more insistent. He was close enough to the window that Ethan could see his expression, clearly concerned and slightly confused, the perfect mask of a worried ex-husband looking for his family. "Hannah," Ethan said quietly, not taking his eyes off the man outside. "Take the kids upstairs. Now. Stay away from windows and keep them quiet." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to find out what he wants." "Ethan, no. Don't open that door. He's dangerous. He's dangerous to you and the children. Right now, I'm just a stranger who might or might not know where you are." Ethan turned to look at her, trying to project more confidence than he felt. "Trust me. I've dealt with men like him before." Hannah hesitated for a moment longer, then gathered Emma and Jake with urgent whispers. Marcus looked confused, but followed his new friends upstairs without question, and soon the house was quiet, except for the sound of Ethan's heartbeat and Chase's continued assault on the doorbell. Ethan took a deep breath, composed his features into an expression of mild annoyance, and opened the door. "Can I help you?" he asked, making his tone slightly impatient, as if he'd been interrupted during something important. Chase's smile was immediately warm and apologetic, a masterclass in instant charm. "I'm so sorry to bother you this early on a Saturday morning. I'm Chase Morrison, and I'm looking for my ex-wife and children. I believe they might have visited here last night." The man's voice was smooth and reasonable, tinged with just the right amount of concern, If Ethan hadn't known the truth, he might have found himself sympathetic to this well-dressed father searching for his family. "Your ex-wife," Ethan replied, letting confusion color his voice. "I'm sorry, I think you might have the wrong house. Hannah Miller, blonde, about 5'6", with 2 children, Emma and Jake." Chase's smile never wavered, but Ethan caught a flicker of something cold in his eyes. "Her car was seen in this neighborhood last night, and I'm worried something might have happened to them." "Miller." Ethan made a show of thinking about it. "Oh, you mean Hannah from the hospital? We work together occasionally, but I haven't seen her recently." It was a calculated risk admitting to knowing Hannah while denying recent contact. But Ethan figured that Chase probably already knew about Hannah's job and might have information about her coworkers. Complete denial would seem suspicious. "You work together?" Chase's interest sharpened slightly, though he maintained his concerned facade. "At Millbrook General. I do some consulting there. IT support." The lie came easily. Ethan had actually done some computer work for the hospital's billing department the previous year. "But like I said, I haven't seen Hannah lately. Is everything okay? You seem worried." Chase stepped closer, and Ethan caught a whiff of expensive cologne mixed with something else, an underlying tension that belied his calm exterior. "There was a miscommunication about custody arrangements," Chase said smoothly. "I was supposed to pick up the children this weekend, but when I went to her apartment, they weren't there. A neighbor mentioned seeing them leave with a dark-haired man, and another neighbor saw them in this area." Every word was carefully chosen, designed to paint Ethan as a potential kidnapper and Chase as a concerned father. Ethan had to admire the man's skill even as it made his skin crawl. "That sounds stressful," Ethan said sympathetically. "Have you tried calling her cell phone? Or maybe checking with other friends?" "Of course I have," Chase replied, allowing a hint of frustration to creep into his voice. "I've been trying to reach her all night. I'm starting to worry that something serious has happened." The performance was flawless. To any observer, Chase would appear to be a devoted father, driven to desperate measures by fear for his children's safety. The fact that he was actually a stalker who had no legal right to see those children would be impossible to detect from his demeanor alone. "Well, I'm sorry I can't help you," Ethan said, beginning to close the door. "But I'm sure everything's fine. Maybe she took the kids on a spontaneous trip." Chase's hand shot out, stopping the door from closing completely. The movement was quick and aggressive, a crack in his careful composure. "Actually," he said, and now his smile had a sharper edge, "I noticed there's a Honda Civic in your driveway. Silver Honda Civic with Colorado plates. That's Hannah's car." Ethan's pulse spiked, but he forced himself to remain calm. "Is it? I hadn't noticed the plates. My neighbors park in my driveway sometimes when they have guests over. The Johnsons next door are having some kind of family gathering." "The Johnsons," Chase repeated, his eyes scanning Ethan's face for signs of deception. "Nice people. Been here longer than I have." Ethan gestured vaguely toward the house next door, which did indeed show signs of activity, multiple cars in the driveway, the sound of voices in the backyard. "You could ask them about the car if you're really concerned." For a moment, Chase seemed to consider this. Ethan could practically see the calculations, happenings behind his eyes, weighing the risk of approaching strangers against the potential reward of finding Hannah and the children. "You know what?" Chase said finally, his smile returning to full wattage. "I think I will do that. Thank you for your time, Mr. Walker." "Ethan Walker." "Thank you, Mr. Walker. And if you do happen to see Hannah or hear from her, could you ask her to call me? I'm sure this is all just a misunderstanding, but I'm worried about the children." "Of course," Ethan lied smoothly. "I hope you find them soon." Chase stepped back from the door, but he didn't leave immediately. Instead, he stood on the porch for a long moment, studying Ethan's face as if trying to memorize every detail. "Enjoy your Saturday," he said finally, and then he was walking down the front steps toward the Johnsons' house. Ethan closed the door and immediately turned the deadbolt, his hands shaking slightly from adrenaline. Through the side window, he watched Chase approach the Johnsons' front door with the same confident stride, the same concerned expression he'd worn moments before. Upstairs, he could hear urgent whispers and the sound of footsteps moving away from windows. Hannah would be terrified, wondering what had happened, whether Chase had somehow talked his way inside. Ethan climbed the stairs quickly, finding all four of them huddled in Marcus's room. The children on the bottom bunk, Hannah standing guard by the window with a baseball bat she'd apparently found somewhere. "He's gone," Ethan said immediately. "He's talking to the Johnsons now, but he doesn't know you're here." Hannah's legs seemed to give out with relief, and she sat heavily on Marcus's desk chair. "What did he say? What did you tell him?" "He said he was looking for his ex-wife and children because of a custody mix-up. I told him I knew you from work, but hadn't seen you recently. He noticed your car in the driveway, but I convinced him it belonged to my neighbor's guests." "Did he believe you?" Ethan considered this. "I think so. He's good, really good at reading people, but I used to deal with manipulative clients all the time in social work. The key is mixing truth with lies so you don't have to remember everything you've said." Emma had been listening with the intense concentration of a child trying to understand adult dangers. "Was that him?" she asked quietly. "Was that our dad?" The word dad seemed to stick in her throat, and Ethan realized that whatever relationship these children had once had with Chase, it had been thoroughly destroyed by his behavior. "Yes, sweetheart," Hannah said gently. "That was Chase." "He sounded nice," Jake observed with the brutal honesty of childhood. "He didn't sound scary. That's what makes him dangerous," Emma said, wise beyond her years. "He's good at pretending to be nice when other people are watching." Hannah's face crumpled at her daughter's words. What kind of education had these children received about their own father? What kinds of conversations had they been forced to have about the difference between public personas and private realities? "Well, he's gone now," Marcus announced with the confidence of someone who'd never had reason to doubt that adults could protect him. "And if he comes back, my dad will handle it." Ethan felt the weight of that faith, the responsibility of protecting not just his own child, but all of them. Through the window he could see Chase gesticulating animatedly, with Mrs. Johnson playing his role of concerned father to perfection. "Hannah," Ethan said carefully, "we need to talk about next steps. Chase finding us here changes things." "I know." Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled as she set down the baseball bat. "He'll be watching this house now. Even if he believes your story today, he'll want to verify it. Which means we need to be smarter, and we need to move faster than we planned." Outside, Chase was shaking hands with Mr. Johnson, apparently satisfied with whatever explanation he'd received about the silver Honda Civic. But instead of leaving, he walked to his own car, a black BMW parked across the street, and stood beside it for several minutes, openly studying Ethan's house. The message was clear. "I know you're in there, and I'm not going anywhere." Hannah joined Ethan at the window, her face pale as she watched her ex-husband's blatant surveillance. "He's not even trying to hide it anymore," she whispered. "That's not like him. Chase is usually more subtle. Maybe he's getting desperate. How long has it been since you left Denver?" 8 months. Long enough for him to realize that we're not coming back, that this isn't some temporary rebellion he can wait out. Ethan watched Chase lean against his BMW with the casual confidence of someone who had all the time in the world. Or maybe he's figured out that subtle isn't working, so he's escalating to direct intimidation, which makes him more dangerous, or more likely to make mistakes, Ethan countered. Hannah, this might actually be good news. If Chase is abandoning his careful approach, if he's getting reckless, then he's more likely to do something we can use as evidence. Hannah turned from the window, her blue eyes fierce with determination. Then let's give him the opportunity. The determination in Hannah's voice sent a chill of both fear and admiration through Ethan. This was the woman who had orchestrated an escape across state lines, who had rebuilt her life from nothing while protecting 2 children. Chase might have found them, but he had also awakened something fierce in Hannah that had been dormant too long. What did you have in mind? Ethan asked, though he suspected he already knew. We stop hiding. We make ourselves visible, predictable, just like you suggested, but we do it smart. Hannah moved away from the window, her movements sharp and purposeful. If Chase wants to watch us, we'll give him something worth watching. From across the street, Chase continued his surveillance, no longer bothering with the pretense of subtlety. His BMW gleamed in the morning sunlight, like a predator marking territory, and Ethan could see him talking on his cell phone, probably reporting their location to someone or arranging for backup surveillance. Kids, Ethan said, turning to the 3 children who had been following the adult conversation with varying degrees of comprehension. How would you like to go on an adventure today? Marcus perked up immediately. What kind of adventure? The kind where we help Emma and Jake's mom solve a very important puzzle. Ethan crouched to their level, choosing his words carefully. But it means we all have to be very brave and very smart. Emma studied his face with those 2 serious eyes. It's about him, isn't it? About Chase? The casual use of her father's first name struck Ethan like a physical blow. These children didn't even call him Dad anymore. That relationship had been so thoroughly destroyed that he'd become simply Chase, a threat to be managed rather than a parent to be loved. Yes, Hannah said, settling beside her daughter on the bed. It's about Chase, and it's about making sure he can never hurt us again. Are we going to call the police? Jake asked, still clutching Rex tightly. Eventually, Ethan replied. But first we need to collect evidence. We need to prove to the police that Chase has been following you, bothering you, making you feel unsafe. Like when he left flowers at my school? Emma asked. Hannah's head snapped toward her daughter. What flowers? When? Last week. The secretary said a nice man brought them for me, said he was my father, and wanted me to know he was thinking about me. Emma's voice was matter of fact, but Ethan could see the tension in her small shoulders. I threw them away before you picked me up. Emma, sweetheart, why didn't you tell me? Because I knew it would scare you, and we were finally starting to feel safe here. The simple wisdom and protective instinct of a 10-year-old left both adults speechless for a moment. Emma had shouldered the burden of adult worries to protect her mother's peace of mind, a responsibility no child should have to carry. No more secrets, Hannah said firmly, pulling Emma into a fierce hug. From now on, we tell each other everything, no matter how scary it might be. We're stronger when we're honest with each other. Does that mean you'll tell us the real plan? Emma asked, her voice muffled against her mother's shoulder. Hannah looked at Ethan over her daughter's head, a silent question in her eyes. How much truth could children handle? How much should they be involved in their own protection? The real plan, Ethan said slowly, is to catch Chase doing something obviously wrong, something so clear that even people who don't know the whole story will understand that he's the bad guy. Like following us? Jake asked. Exactly like following us. But we need it on camera, and we need witnesses who can testify that his behavior was threatening. Marcus, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. My dad's really good with cameras. He helped the police catch the guy who was stealing packages from our neighbor's porch. Ethan smiled at his son's faith in his abilities. The package thief had been caught thanks to a simple doorbell camera and Marcus's eagle-eyed observation skills, but apparently the story had grown in the telling. "That's right," Ethan said, "and we're going to use those same skills to help Emma and Jake." Hannah stood up, her expression resolute. "What do we need to do?" "First, we establish the routine I mentioned yesterday. You go to work Monday, take your normal route, act like everything is business as usual. I'll follow at a distance with cameras, and if Chase is tracking you, we'll document it. What about the kids? I'm not putting them at risk to get evidence." "The kids stay with me. Marcus is off school for teacher planning day on Monday anyway, and I can call in sick. We'll say Emma and Jake are visiting cousins from out of town." "But Chase will expect to see them with me," Hannah protested. "If they're not in their normal routine, he'll know something's up." Ethan had already considered this problem. "Not necessarily. You've been unpredictable for months, right? Changing schedules, varying routines to throw him off. One day of the kids being somewhere else won't immediately scream trap to him. And it gets them safely out of the way while we gather evidence," Hannah added, understanding dawning in her eyes. From the window came the sound of a car door slamming. Chase was getting back into his BMW, apparently finished with his surveillance for the moment. But as he drove away, he moved slowly, deliberately, making sure anyone watching would see his license plate, would remember his presence in the neighborhood. "He's marking territory," Hannah observed with bitter recognition, "letting everyone know that we're his property and he's not giving up." "Good," Ethan said grimly. "Territorial behavior is exactly what we need to document. Judges understand property crimes, boundary violations. They might not immediately grasp the psychological aspects of stalking, but they definitely understand someone who won't respect clear boundaries." The rest of Saturday passed in careful planning disguised as normal family activities. They took the children to the park where Ethan discreetly tested camera angles and sight lines while the kids played. They went grocery shopping with Hannah, following her usual routine while Ethan noted potential surveillance points and escape routes. Throughout the day, they spotted Chase's BMW 3 separate times parked near the grocery store, idling at the edge of the park, driving slowly past Ethan's house. Each sighting confirmed what they already knew: Chase had abandoned any pretense of subtlety and committed fully to open intimidation. "He's not even trying to hide anymore," Hannah murmured as they watched the black car cruise past for the second time that evening. "Which means he's confident," Ethan replied. "He thinks he's untouchable, that his word will carry more weight than yours if it comes to a legal battle." He's probably right. Chase has friends in law enforcement back in Denver, character witnesses who'll testify that he's a devoted father, wrongfully separated from his children. But we're not in Denver anymore. Here he's just another out-of-state stalker with no local connections and a pattern of boundary violations we're about to document thoroughly. Sunday morning brought a new development that changed everything. Hannah was helping Marcus and Jake build an elaborate breakfast sandwich when her phone buzzed with a text message. The color drained from her face as she read it, and her hands began to shake. "What is it?" Ethan asked, immediately moving to her side. Wordlessly, Hannah held out her phone. The message was from an unknown number, but the tone was unmistakably Chase's. "Hannah, I know you're reading this. The children need stability, and you need help. I'm staying at the Millbrook Inn until we can work this out. Room 237. We're family, and family doesn't abandon each other. I'll be waiting." The casual possession implicit in the message, the assumption that Hannah would eventually come to him, that resistance was merely temporary, made Ethan's jaw clench with anger. "How did he get your new number?" he asked. "I don't know. I changed it when we moved here, only gave it to work and the kids' schools." Hannah stared at the phone, as if it might bite her. Unless what? Unless he has access to my phone records somehow." Chase is good with technology, and he has friends who work in telecommunications. The implications hit them both simultaneously. If Chase could access Hannah's phone records, he could track her movements, monitor her communications, potentially even listen to her conversations. "Turn it off," Ethan said immediately. "Right now, and remove the battery if you can." Hannah powered down the phone with shaking fingers. "If he's been tracking my phone, then he knows I've been here since Friday night. He knows I didn't go home. Which explains why he came here yesterday morning instead of waiting for you at your apartment." Emma, who had been quietly observing the adults' tension, spoke up from the breakfast table. "What does he want?" Hannah looked at her daughter, then at Jake, who had stopped building his sandwich to listen. "How did you explain to children that their father wanted to control them, own them, treat them like property rather than people?" "He wants us to come back," Hannah said finally. "He wants things to go back to the way they were before." "Before he scared us all the time?" Jake asked, with devastating innocence. "Yes, sweetheart, before that." "But we like it here," Emma said firmly. "We like Ethan and Marcus and Mrs. Patterson and not being scared. We're not going back." The simple declaration, delivered with the absolute certainty only children possessed, crystallized something in Hannah's expression. Whatever doubts she might have harbored about fighting instead of running evaporated in the face of her daughter's fierce determination. "No," she said, her voice steady for the first time since reading the text. "We're not going back, ever." Ethan felt something shift in the room's atmosphere, fear transforming into resolve, uncertainty becoming determination. Chase might have intended his message as intimidation, but instead he'd reminded Hannah and her children exactly what they were fighting to protect. "All right," Ethan said, pulling out his own phone. "Change of plans. We're not waiting until Monday to start collecting evidence." "What do you mean, Chukun?" "I mean, Chase just gave us a gift. He told us exactly where he's staying, and he's expecting you to contact him. That level of confidence suggests he's planning something beyond just waiting in his hotel room." Hannah frowned. "You think he'll escalate? I think he'll get impatient. Men like Chase don't issue ultimatums and then sit quietly waiting for responses. He'll want to apply pressure, force your hand somehow." As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of a car engine drew their attention to the front window. Chase's BMW was back, parked directly across from Ethan's house with no attempt at concealment. Through the windshield, they could see him talking on his phone again, gesturing animatedly. "He's definitely planning something," Hannah said grimly. "Good. Let him plan. While he's focused on psychological manipulation, we'll be building a legal case that will put him away for a long time." Ethan spent the next hour making calls to contacts from his social work days, a retired police detective who specialized in domestic violence cases, a family court advocate who understood stalking patterns, a private investigator who owed him a favor from a particularly difficult case 3 years earlier. The private investigator, a sharp-eyed woman named Rita Castellanos, arrived at Ethan's house within 2 hours of his call. She was small and unremarkable, the kind of person who could blend into any crowd, but her eyes missed nothing as she assessed the situation. "Standard stalking escalation pattern," she confirmed after reviewing the timeline of Chase's behavior. "He's moved from covert surveillance to overt intimidation. Next step is usually direct confrontation or property violation." "Property violation?" Hannah asked. "Breaking into your apartment, vandalizing your car, leaving items where he knows you'll find them. Things that send a message about his ability to access your personal space whenever he wants." "How do we catch him doing something like that?" Rita smiled grimly. "We give him opportunities and document everything. Hannah, I need you to go home." "Absolutely not," Ethan said immediately. "That's exactly what he wants. It's exactly what he wants, which makes it exactly what we need to give him under controlled circumstances. Rita pulled out a tablet and began sketching a plan. Hannah goes to her apartment, stays for exactly 1 hour, doing normal activities, laundry cleaning, meal prep. I'll have surveillance set up to catch any approach he makes. What if he tries to get inside? What if he hurts her? He won't, not yet. Chase is still in the intimidation phase, testing boundaries. He wants Hannah to know he can find her anywhere, that running is pointless. But he's not ready for direct violence that comes later if psychological pressure doesn't work. Hannah was quiet for a long moment, considering the proposal. What about the kids? The kids stay here with Ethan. As far as Chase knows, you're alone and vulnerable. That's when men like him feel most confident about making their move. You want to use me as bait. I want to use his arrogance against him, Rita corrected. Chase thinks he's untouchable, that his word carries more weight than yours. We're going to prove him wrong. The plan that emerged over the next hour was complex but elegant. Hannah would return to her apartment Sunday afternoon, establishing a pattern that Chase could follow and predict. Rita would position surveillance equipment to document any approach he made, any boundary violations, any evidence of his ongoing harassment. Meanwhile, Ethan would keep the children safe while also serving as backup, close enough to respond if something went wrong, far enough away to avoid compromising the surveillance operation. This feels dangerous, Hannah said as they finalized the details. Everything about this situation is dangerous, Rita replied bluntly. The question is whether you want to control the danger or let it control you. At 3 o'clock Sunday afternoon, Hannah kissed her children goodbye with forced casualness, promising to return within 2 hours. Emma and Jake clung to her with the desperate intensity of children who had learned that separations could become permanent without warning. I'll be back, Hannah promised, kneeling to their level. This time is different. This time we're not running away, we're fighting back. Promise, Jake whispered. Rex clutched tightly in his arms. I promise. And you know what? When I get back, we're going to order Chinese food and watch movies until bedtime, all of us together. The mundane promise of takeout and family time seemed to comfort the children more than any grand declaration about safety or justice. Sometimes, the most powerful assurance was the simple expectation of shared normalcy. As Hannah drove away in her silver Honda Civic, followed at a discreet distance by Rita, in an unmarked van, Ethan gathered the 3 children in his living room and tried to project confidence he didn't entirely feel. All right, team, he said with forced cheer. Who wants to learn how to make the world's best chocolate chip cookies? The next 90 minutes passed in a blur of flour, sugar, and nervous energy. Ethan found himself checking his phone constantly, waiting for updates from Rita or Hannah, while the children threw themselves into cookie making with the desperate enthusiasm of kids trying to distract themselves from adult worries. Marcus, reading the room with the intuitive wisdom of childhood, appointed himself chief entertainer, regaling Emma and Jake with elaborate stories about his school adventures and neighborhood characters. His 8-year-old chatter filled the kitchen with normalcy, providing a soundtrack of innocence against the backdrop of very adult fears. At 4:30, Ethan's phone buzzed with a text from Rita. Subject arrived at apartment complex 20 minutes after target. Positioned in parking lot with clear view of her unit. Recording everything. The message should have been reassuring. Their plan was working. Evidence was being collected. But all Ethan felt was a sick dread in his stomach. Hannah was alone in her apartment, while her stalker ex-husband watched from the parking lot, and every instinct Ethan possessed screamed that something was about to go wrong. Dad, Marcus said, tugging on Ethan's sleeve. The timer went off. The cookies are ready. Ethan blinked, realizing he'd been staring at his phone for several minutes, while 24 chocolate chip cookies turned golden brown in his oven. He pulled them out, quickly, grateful for the simple task that grounded him in the present moment. "Perfect timing," he said, though his voice sounded strained even to his own ears. Emma appeared beside him, studying his face with those perceptive eyes. "She's going to be okay," she said quietly. "Mom's really brave when she needs to be." The fact that a 10-year-old was comforting him about her mother's safety highlighted exactly how upside down this situation had become. These children had been forced to develop resilience and wisdom far beyond their years, and Ethan felt a fresh surge of anger at the man who had stolen their innocence. At 5 o'clock, Hannah's scheduled return time came and went without word. Ethan's phone remained stubbornly silent, and the cookies grew cold on their cooling rack while he paced between the kitchen and living room windows. 5:15. 5:30. By 5:45, Ethan was seriously considering breaking protocol and driving to Hannah's apartment complex himself. Then his phone rang. "It's Hannah," came the familiar voice, but there was something wrong with the tone. "I'm okay, but we have a problem." "What kind of problem?" "Chase didn't just watch from the parking lot. About an hour after I got here, he came to my door." Ethan's blood ran cold. "Did he get inside? Are you hurt?" "No, I didn't let him in, but Ethan, he had a key." The words hit like a physical blow. "What do you mean he had a key?" "I mean he unlocked my front door and walked into my living room like he belonged here. If I hadn't put the chain lock on, he would have been inside before I knew he was coming." "Jesus, Hannah. Where is he now?" "Gone. Rita got it all on camera, him using the key, me telling him to leave him standing in my doorway making threats. But Ethan, if he has a key to my apartment, then he's been inside before. Probably multiple times." Ethan felt sick thinking about the implications. "Hannah, get out of there. Now. Don't pack anything. Don't worry about belongings. Just leave." "I'm already in my car. Rita's following me back to your house." "But Ethan, what if he has cameras in there? What if he's been watching us, listening to our conversations?" The possibility had occurred to Ethan, but hearing it vocalized made it real in a way that turned his stomach. How long had Chase been violating Hannah's privacy? What had he seen? What had he heard? What intimate moments had he stolen through hidden surveillance? "We'll deal with that later," Ethan said firmly. "Right now, just focus on getting back here safely." "The kids are fine. They're making cookie crumb sculptures in the kitchen and asking when you will be home for Chinese food." Hannah's laugh was shaky but genuine. "Tell them I'm on my way. And Ethan, thank you for all of this. I know this isn't what you signed up for." "Hannah, stop. You don't need to thank me for doing what's right. I need to thank someone. I've been fighting this alone for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to have backup." 20 minutes later, Hannah's Honda Civic pulled into Ethan's driveway, followed by Rita's unmarked van. The children rushed outside before Ethan could stop them, surrounding Hannah with hugs and questions, and the kind of desperate relief that children displayed when adults they loved returned safely from danger. "Did you bring Chinese food?" Jake asked hopefully. "Not yet, sweetheart, but I will. Rita and I need to talk to Ethan first, then we'll order enough food for an army." Rita entered the house with the grim satisfaction of someone whose worst suspicions had been confirmed. She set up her laptop on Ethan's dining room table and pulled up video footage that made all three adults grow quiet with anger. The footage was crystal clear, Chase approaching Hannah's apartment door with confident strides, producing a key from his pocket, unlocking the door as if he had every right to be there. When the chain lock prevented him from entering fully, his expression shifted from confidence to fury in seconds. "Hannah, I know you're in there." His voice came clearly through the recording. "We need to talk." The children need stability, and this game you're playing needs to end. Hannah's voice muffled but audible from inside the apartment. Chase, I'm calling the police. You need to leave now. The police, Hannah. I'm their father. I have a right to know where my children are to make sure they're safe. You have no rights here. We're divorced and you're not supposed to contact me. There was never a restraining order that stuck, was there, just temporary measures that expired months ago. Technically, I'm not breaking any laws. The calculated nature of Chase's response, the way he'd clearly researched the legal loopholes, prepared his justifications, made Rita shake her head grimly. He's done this before, she said. This level of preparation doesn't happen overnight. The video continued with Chase making increasingly explicit threats disguised as concerned observations. He knew Hannah's work schedule, knew which school the children attended, knew details about their daily routines that should have been impossible for him to obtain. How is he getting this information? Ethan asked. Multiple sources, Rita replied. Phone tracking, social media monitoring, possibly human intelligence people he's paying or manipulating to watch and report. People like who? Ex-neighbors, former mutual friends, even strangers he's convinced to keep an eye out for his missing family. Chase has probably spent months building a surveillance network. Hannah sat in stunned silence, absorbing the scope of the violation. He's been watching us since before we left Denver. Probably planning your escape route before you even knew you were going to run, Rita confirmed. Men like Chase don't react to abandonment, they anticipate it and prepare countermeasures. The footage ended with Chase finally leaving Hannah's doorway, but not before delivering a final message that chilled everyone in the room. This doesn't end until you come home, Hannah. All three of you. I'll be waiting at the Millbrook Inn until you come to your senses. Rita closed the laptop with decisive finality. That's everything we need for a restraining order and stalking charges. Clear evidence of harassment, boundary violations, implied threats. No judge is going to look at this footage and see a concerned father. What about the key? Hannah asked. How did he get a key to my apartment? That's a separate crime, breaking and entering, possibly burglary, if we can prove he's taken anything or installed surveillance equipment. But we'll need to search your apartment to document what he's done. I can't go back there, Hannah said immediately. Not knowing he's been inside, that he might have cameras or listening devices. I can't live somewhere he's contaminated. Ethan reached over and took her hand, surprised by how natural the gesture felt. You don't have to go back. You and the kids can stay here as long as you need to. Ethan, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. Hannah, you've been carrying this alone for too long. Let someone else help for a while. Rita looked between them with the knowing expression of someone who'd seen many domestic violence cases reach this crossroads. That's probably the safest option anyway. Chase knows where Hannah lives, but he doesn't know about the relationship between all of you. As far as he's concerned, Ethan is just someone Hannah works with occasionally. But won't he figure it out if Hannah doesn't go back to her apartment, if she doesn't show up at work tomorrow? We want him to figure it out, Rita said with a predatory smile. We want him to get frustrated, to escalate his behavior, to make the kind of mistakes that turn misdemeanor stalking into felony harassment. Right now, we have enough evidence for a restraining order. What we need is enough evidence to put him in prison. The plan that emerged over Chinese takeout and careful conversation was both simple and terrifying. Hannah would essentially disappear from her normal routine, forcing Chase to come looking for her in increasingly desperate and illegal ways. Every attempt he made to find her, every boundary he crossed, every threat he made would be documented and added to the growing case against him. It's psychological warfare, Rita explained. Chase's entire strategy depends on his ability to control the situation, to predict Hannah's responses. When she stops being predictable, when she stops responding to his pressure, he'll get desperate. And desperate people make mistakes, Ethan added, understanding the logic even as it terrified him. Exactly. But it also means you all need to be extremely careful. Desperate people are also dangerous people. As the evening wound down and the children settled in for another night at Ethan's house, Hannah found herself standing at the kitchen window again, looking out at the street where Chase's BMW had been parked just hours earlier. "He's not out there anymore," Ethan said, joining her at the window. "He doesn't need to be. He knows where we are now, knows this house is important to me somehow. He'll be planning his next move. Let him plan. We'll be ready." Hannah turned from the window to look at Ethan directly. "Are you scared?" The question caught him off guard. Was he scared? Absolutely. Terrified would be more accurate. But underneath the fear was something else. A fierce protectiveness that had nothing to do with obligation and everything to do with the way Emma's hand had found his during a scary part of their movie. The way Jake had fallen asleep, clutching Rex and leaning against Ethan's shoulder. The way Hannah had looked at him when she said, "Thank you for doing what's right." "Yes," he said honestly. "I'm scared, but I'm also angry and I'm committed. Chase Morrison has terrorized you and your children for too long. It's time someone stood up to him. Even if it puts you and Marcus at risk." Ethan considered this, thinking about his son sleeping peacefully upstairs, dreaming 8-year-old dreams in a world where he'd never had to fear the adults who were supposed to protect him. "Marcus is already at risk," he said finally. "We all are. Men like Chase don't just hurt their immediate targets, they poison entire communities with fear and violence. The only way to protect Marcus is to stop Chase from hurting anyone else." Hannah nodded slowly, understanding passing between them that went beyond words. They were no longer just protecting her family. They were protecting everyone Chase might victimize in the future. "Okay," she said, her voice steady with new resolve. "Let's finish this." Outside, the October night was quiet and peaceful, giving no hint of the storm that was building. Somewhere across town, Chase Morrison was probably planning his next move, confident in his ability to force Hannah back under his control. He had no idea that his former victim had found allies, that his patterns had been documented, that his escalating behavior was walking him straight into a legal trap that would destroy him completely. The battle lines were drawn, and for the first time since leaving Denver, Hannah felt like she might actually win. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October clarity that made everything seem possible. But Ethan woke with a knot of anxiety in his stomach that no amount of coffee could dissolve. Hannah had barely slept, spending most of the night alternating between checking on the children and staring out windows, waiting for Chase's next move. The call came at 7:23 a.m., just as Ethan was scrambling eggs for an unusually quiet breakfast table. Hannah's phone, which they'd turned back on to monitor Chase's communications, buzzed with an incoming call from the Millbrook Inn. "Don't answer it," Rita advised from her position at the kitchen table where she'd been monitoring surveillance feeds since 6 a.m. "Let him leave a message. We want him on record making his own threats." The phone rang 8 times before going to voicemail. Within seconds, a new message notification appeared. Hannah's hands trembled as she put the call on speaker for everyone to hear. Chase's voice filled the kitchen, smooth and reasonable, despite the underlying menace. "Hannah, it's me. I'm disappointed that you didn't come to the hotel yesterday. I thought we could resolve this like adults, but apparently you need more time to think about what's best for the children. I've taken the liberty of visiting Emma's school this morning to ensure she's receiving proper care in your absence." The administrators were very concerned when they learned you hadn't informed them of my visit. I've also contacted Jake's teacher about some behavioral concerns that need addressing. Children need both parents, Hannah. They need stability. Call me back within 6 hours, or I'll be forced to take more direct action to ensure their welfare. The message ended with a soft click that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Emma's face had gone pale, and Jake had moved closer to his mother, sensing the adult tension, even if he didn't fully understand its source. He went to their schools, Hannah whispered, the implication hitting her like a physical blow. He's using the children as pressure points. Rita was already on her phone, dialing rapidly. I'm calling both schools right now. We need to establish that Chase has no legal right to information about the children and that his presence constitutes harassment. Emma spoke up from her place at the breakfast table, her voice small but determined. What did he tell them about me? About my behavior? Hannah knelt beside her daughter's chair, taking Emma's hands in hers. Whatever he said, it wasn't true. You've been perfect, brave, and smart, and so much stronger than any 10-year-old should have to be. But what if the teachers believe him? What if they think I'm a bad kid? The fear in Emma's voice, the terror that adults she trusted might turn against her based on her father's lies, broke something in Ethan's chest. These children had been living with the constant threat of having their reality distorted, their relationships poisoned by Chase's manipulation. Emma, Ethan said, sitting beside her. Good teachers can tell the difference between truth and lies. They've seen you in class, they know who you really are. One conversation with your father isn't going to change that. Marcus, who had been uncharacteristically quiet throughout breakfast, suddenly stood up with the decisive energy that always preceded his 8-year-old proclamations. Emma's the smartest kid in our grade, he announced. Everyone knows that. And Jake is really good at drawing dinosaurs. Nobody's going to believe bad things about them. The simple faith in his declaration seemed to bolster both Emma and Jake, reminding them that they had advocates beyond just the adults in this room. Rita finished her calls with grim efficiency. Both schools have been alerted. Chase presented himself as a concerned father conducting a surprise welfare check, but the principals weren't comfortable with his approach. Emma's teacher said he seemed more interested in asking about Hannah's behavior and schedule than about Emma's academic progress. He's fishing for information, Hannah said with bitter recognition. Trying to figure out where I am, what my routine looks like now. And creating a paper trail that makes him look like a devoted father while painting you as an irresponsible mother, Rita added. Classic manipulation strategy. Ethan felt anger building in his chest, not the hot, impulsive rage he might have felt as a younger man, but the cold, determined fury of someone who had seen too much injustice and refused to tolerate more. What's our next move? He asked. We accelerate the timeline, Rita replied. Chase is escalating faster than we anticipated, which means we need to force his hand before he has time to build more elaborate schemes. What does that mean exactly? Rita pulled out her tablet and began sketching a new plan. It means Hannah goes back to work today, follows her normal routine, but with full surveillance support. We want Chase to follow her, to make contact, to do something so blatantly inappropriate that even his charm can't explain it away. Absolutely not, Ethan said immediately. That's too dangerous. It's dangerous, Rita agreed, but it's also our best chance to end this quickly. The longer we wait, the more time Chase has to establish himself in the community, to build relationships that will support his version of events. Hannah had been listening to this exchange with growing resolve. She's right, she said quietly. I can't hide forever, and I can't keep the kids out of school indefinitely. If we're going to do this, we need to do it now, while we still control the circumstances. Hannah, Ethan, look at me. Her blue eyes were steady, fierce with determination. "I've been running from this man for 8 months. I've let him chase me across the country, disrupt my children's lives, steal our sense of safety. I'm done being his victim." Emma looked up from her barely touched breakfast. "Does that mean we have to go to school today? What if he comes back?" "You're not going to school," Hannah assured her. "You and Jake are staying here with Ethan and Marcus, while I take care of some grown-up business." "What kind of grown-up business?" Jake asked his 6-year-old radar, detecting the tension beneath his mother's calm tone. "The kind that makes sure Chase can't bother us anymore," Hannah replied with the kind of honesty children deserved. "It might be scary for a little while, but it's going to fix things for good." Emma studied her mother's face with those perceptive eyes. "You're going to make him go away." "We're going to make him go away," Hannah corrected, glancing at Ethan and Rita. "All of us together." The plan that emerged over the next 2 hours was both elegant and terrifying. Hannah would return to work at Millbrook General following her normal schedule and routine. Rita would maintain surveillance from multiple angles, documenting any approach Chase made. Ethan would remain at home with the children, ready to respond if the situation escalated beyond psychological warfare. Most importantly, they would use Chase's own tactics against him. Just as he had been monitoring Hannah's communications, they would record every interaction, every threat, every boundary violation. The difference was that their surveillance was legal documented and building toward a prosecution that would put Chase in prison. "Remember," Rita cautioned, as Hannah prepared to leave for work. "Act natural, but not normal. You want to seem slightly off your routine, stressed, distracted, making small mistakes that suggest you're feeling pressure. Chase needs to believe his intimidation is working." "That won't be hard to fake," Hannah said with a rueful smile. "I am stressed and distracted. The key is controlling how much stress you show and when. If you seem too composed, he'll suspect a trap. If you seem too panicked, he might escalate to violence." Ethan walked Hannah to her car, acutely aware that this might be the last normal conversation they had before everything changed. The October morning was beautiful, clear skies, golden leaves, the kind of day that should have been filled with simple pleasures instead of elaborate schemes to catch predators. "Are you sure about this?" he asked as Hannah unlocked her Honda Civic. "No," she replied honestly. "But I'm sure about what happens if we don't try." Chase doesn't give up, Ethan. He doesn't get bored or distracted or move on to easier targets. He'll keep escalating until someone stops him. What if something goes wrong? What if he... Hannah silenced him by placing her hand against his cheek, a gesture so unexpected and intimate that it stopped his words entirely. "Then you take care of my children," she said quietly. "You make sure Emma and Jake know they're loved and safe and that none of this was their fault. Hannah, promise me. If something happens to me, promise you won't let them go back to him." The weight of what she was asking, the trust she was placing in him, left Ethan speechless for a moment. She was asking him to become a father to children he'd known for less than a week, to fight a legal battle against a man with resources and connections, to reshape his entire life around protecting 2 kids who deserved better than the hand they'd been dealt. "I promise," he said without hesitation. "But nothing's going to happen to you. We're going to end this today, and you are going to come home safe." Hannah's smile was radiant despite the circumstances. "I like the sound of that. Coming home." She drove away with a casual wave that masked the gravity of what they were attempting. From the front window, Ethan could see the children watching her departure with barely concealed anxiety. Emma held Jake's hand, while Marcus stood protectively beside both of them, all 3 united in their determination to be brave for the adults who were trying to keep them safe. The waiting began immediately. Rita positioned herself in the hospital parking lot with a clear view of all entrances while maintaining radio contact with Ethan. Hannah checked in every hour with brief coded messages that confirmed she was safe and that Chase had not yet made contact. The first sign of trouble came at 11:30 a.m. when Hannah's voice crackled through Rita's radio with barely controlled tension. Package delivery at the nurse's station. Addressed to me, no return address delivered by someone matching the target's description. Rita's response was immediate. Do not open it. Alert security and have them document everything before you handle the package. Already done. Security chief wants to review camera footage of the delivery. Ethan felt his stomach clench as he listened to the exchange. Chase was escalating exactly as Rita had predicted, but the reality of it, the knowledge that Hannah was alone and potentially in danger, made every protective instinct he possessed scream for action. What's happening? Emma asked from her position at the kitchen table, where she'd been pretending to focus on homework, while actually monitoring every adult conversation. Your mom is handling some workplace business, Ethan replied, trying to keep his voice calm. Nothing for you to worry about. Emma's look clearly indicated that she wasn't buying his reassurance, but she didn't push for more information. At 10 years old, she'd already learned when adult worries were too big for children to carry. The radio crackled again at noon. Package contained children's drawings and a note. Note says the kids drew these for Daddy. We should be together as a family. This separation is hurting them. Security confirms delivery person matches target's description and was asking questions about my schedule. Rita's voice was grimly satisfied. Perfect. We have him on camera delivering threatening materials to your workplace. That's harassment, intimidation, and possibly criminal impersonation if he claimed to be acting on the children's behalf. But Chase wasn't finished. At 1:15 p.m., Hannah's voice returned with new urgency. Target is in the hospital lobby. He's talking to the information desk, claiming to be my ex-husband and saying he needs to speak with me about a family emergency. Do not go to the lobby, Rita instructed immediately. Stay in the nursing unit and let security handle it. Security is already responding. They're asking him to leave. Is he complying? There was a pause that stretched too long, filled with static and the distant sound of voices. When Hannah's voice returned, it carried a note of real fear. He's not leaving. He's insisting that he has a right to see me, that we have children together, and this is a family matter. Security called the police. Ethan felt his world narrow to a single point of focus. Hannah was trapped in a hospital with her stalker ex-husband, while police were en route, and he was miles away with 3 children who needed protection. Every instinct demanded that he rush to help her, but leaving Emma and Jake unprotected was exactly what Chase might be hoping for. The radio remained ominously quiet for nearly 10 minutes before Rita's voice cut through the silence. Police have arrived. Target is being escorted from the premises. Hannah is safe and providing a statement. The relief that flooded through Ethan was so intense it left him dizzy. But even as his immediate fear for Hannah's safety subsided, he realized that Chase's public confrontation at the hospital had changed everything. There was no more pretending this was a private family matter, no more hiding behind claims of concerned parenthood. Chase had just committed multiple crimes in front of witnesses, with security cameras rolling and police involvement. The children had been listening to enough of the conversation to understand that something significant had happened. Marcus looked confused, Emma appeared worried but determined, and Jake was clutching Rex with white-knuckled intensity. Is Mom okay? Emma asked, with the direct honesty that cut through any adult attempt at deflection. She's fine, Ethan replied, and for the first time all day it felt completely true. She's safe and she'll be home soon. What about Chase? Is he going to jail? The question was so hopeful, so desperate for a simple solution to a complex problem, that Ethan felt his heart break a little. "We're working on it, sweetheart. Today was a big step toward making sure he can't bother your family anymore." Rita's voice returned to the radio at 2:45 p.m. "Target has been arrested on charges of harassment, trespassing, and violation of a verbal no-contact order issued by hospital security. He's being held pending arraignment. Hannah is finishing her statement and will be released shortly." The words seemed to echo in Ethan's kitchen, too good to be true after months of fear and uncertainty. Chase Morrison was finally in police custody, facing real charges that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. But Ethan had worked in social services long enough to know that arrests were just the beginning of the legal process. Chase would make bail hire lawyers and use every resource at his disposal to minimize the consequences of his actions. The fight was far from over. Hannah arrived home at 4:30 p.m. looking exhausted but triumphant. The children rushed to meet her at the door, surrounding her with hugs and questions, and the kind of desperate relief that came from worrying about someone you loved. "Is it over?" Jake asked, his 6-year-old voice small with hope. "Not completely," Hannah replied with careful honesty. "But we won something important today. Chase was arrested, which means the police now have an official record of his behavior." "Does that mean he'll go to prison?" Emma asked. "It means he might go to prison depending on what happens next. But even if he doesn't, everyone knows now that he's been lying about being a good father who just wants to see his children." Rita joined them in the living room, her laptop open to a screen full of police reports and legal documents. "The charges are solid," she announced. "Harassment in the first-degree criminal, trespassing, intimidation, and attempted violation of workplace security. The hospital's security chief is willing to testify, and we have clear video evidence of Chase's behavior." "What happens now?" Ethan asked. "Now we prepare for the long game. Chase will make bail probably by tomorrow morning. He'll hire a lawyer and try to paint this as a misunderstanding, a devoted father driven to desperate measures by being separated from his children." Hannah's expression hardened. "But we have evidence now, real evidence that can't be dismissed." "We do, but Chase has resources and he's smart. He'll use the time between now and his trial to build a counter-narrative, to find character witnesses who'll testify that he's a good man caught in a difficult situation." "So what do we do?" Rita's smile was predatory. "We make sure he doesn't have time to build that narrative. We push for the fastest possible trial date, and we keep documenting every contact he makes, every boundary he crosses, every attempt he makes to intimidate witnesses." The evening that followed was strange and surreal, part celebration, part war council, part ordinary family dinner. They ordered pizza again, and the children gradually relaxed as it became clear that the immediate danger had passed. Marcus regaled everyone with detailed plans for the treehouse he and Jacob were going to build, while Emma helped Hannah review legal documents with the serious concentration of someone far older than her years. But underneath the normalcy, everyone understood that they had crossed a point of no return. Chase was no longer an abstract threat lurking in the shadows. He was a concrete enemy with a court date and nothing left to lose. At bedtime, as Ethan tucked Marcus into the bottom bunk, while Jake settled into the top with Rex, his son looked at him with unusual seriousness. "Dad, are Emma and Jake going to live with us forever?" The question caught Ethan off guard. In all the strategic planning and legal maneuvering, he hadn't really considered the long-term implications of what they were building together. "I don't know, buddy. That depends on a lot of things that haven't been decided yet." "I hope they do," Marcus said, with 8-year-old certainty. "It's more fun having them here. And Jake really needs Rex to protect him from bad dreams." Looking up at the top bunk where Jake was already fast asleep, clutching the stuffed dinosaur that had become his talisman against fear, Ethan felt something shift in his understanding of what family could mean. Downstairs, Hannah was standing at the kitchen window again, but this time she wasn't scanning for threats. Instead, she was simply looking out at the quiet suburban street, where her children were finally safe enough to sleep peacefully. "Penny, for your thoughts," Ethan said, joining her at the window. "I was thinking about the first time I brought Emma and Jake here," she replied. "3 days ago when I whispered that my kids were in the car. I was so scared, so certain that I was ruining your evening and putting you in danger. And now—" Hannah turned to face him, and in the soft kitchen light, she looked younger somehow, as if some burden she'd been carrying had finally been lifted. "Now I think maybe Sarah knew exactly what she was doing when she set us up," she said. "Maybe she knew that you were exactly what we needed, and maybe we were exactly what you needed too." Ethan considered this, thinking about how quiet his house had been before Emma's serious questions and Jake's dinosaur expertise and Hannah's fierce determination to protect her children. "Marcus asked if you and the kids were going to live here forever," he said. "What did you tell him?" "That it depended on things that hadn't been decided yet." Hannah stepped closer, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her blue eyes, could smell the faint scent of her shampoo mixed with the lingering stress of the day. "What if I said I'd like to help decide those things?" she asked quietly. "I'd say that sounds like the best idea I've heard all week." The kiss that followed was soft and tentative, full of promise and possibility, and the careful hope of two people who had learned not to take happiness for granted. When they broke apart, Ethan could hear the sound of children's breathing from upstairs, the tick of the kitchen clock, the ordinary sounds of a house full of people who cared about each other. Outside, the October night was quiet and peaceful. Somewhere across town, Chase Morrison was sitting in a jail cell, probably planning his next move, confident that money and lawyers and charm could get him out of this temporary setback. He had no idea that his former victims had found something worth fighting for, something stronger than fear or isolation or the crushing weight of facing him alone. He had no idea that he had already lost. The legal battle would continue. There would be court dates and depositions and all the grinding machinery of justice. But the real war, the one for Hannah's freedom and her children's safety, and the right to build a life without fear that war was already over. Chase Morrison just didn't know it yet. As Hannah and Ethan stood together in the kitchen of a house that had become a sanctuary, surrounded by the evidence of lives lived in safety and hope, the future stretched ahead of them, bright with possibility. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight they were exactly where they belonged. Home. The morning of Chase Morrison's trial dawned gray and cold, with November wind rattling the windows of Ethan's house like an unwelcome visitor demanding entry. Hannah sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a coffee mug that had long since gone cold, staring at the legal documents Rita had prepared for today's testimony. 6 weeks had passed since Chase's arrest, 6 weeks of depositions and motions and the grinding machinery of justice. But this was the day that would determine everything. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed for school, but moving with the careful quiet of someone trying not to disturb important adult business. At 10 years old, she understood that today was significant, that the outcome of events she couldn't control would shape the rest of her childhood. "Are you nervous, Mom?" she asked, settling into the chair beside Hannah with the serious demeanor that had become her default expression during the weeks leading up to the trial. "Yes, sweetheart, I am," Hannah replied, reaching over to smooth Emma's blonde hair. "But it's the good kind of nervous, The kind you feel when you're about to finish something really important. Like when you're taking a test you studied really hard for. Exactly like that. Jake wandered into the kitchen clutching Rex, his 6-year-old face puffy with sleep and confusion about why everyone was awake so early. The stuffed dinosaur had become his constant companion during the pre-trial proceedings, a tangible reminder that some protections were reliable even when the adult world felt uncertain. "Is today the day Chase goes away forever?" he asked, with the directness that only children possessed. Hannah exchanged a look with Ethan, who was scrambling eggs with mechanical precision, his own anxiety manifesting in aggressive breakfast preparation. They had been careful not to make promises about outcomes they couldn't guarantee, but Jake's question cut straight to the heart of what they were all hoping for. "Today is the day we tell a judge exactly what Chase did to our family," Hannah said carefully. "The judge will decide what happens next." "But he's definitely not coming back to our house, right?" Marcus asked, emerging from upstairs with the kind of bedhead that suggested he'd spent the night wrestling with his pillow. Over the past 6 weeks, he'd appointed himself as unofficial protector of Emma and Jake, a role he took with 8-year-old seriousness. "He's definitely not coming back to our house," Ethan confirmed, setting a plate of perfectly scrambled eggs in front of each child. "Whatever happens today, that part is certain." The truth was more complicated than Ethan's reassurance suggested. Chase had made bail within 24 hours of his arrest, just as Rita had predicted. But instead of the immediate escalation, they'd feared he had gone quiet, retreating behind a wall of expensive lawyers and strategic silence. His attorney, a sharp-dressed man named Bradley Hancock, who specialized in defending wealthy men accused of domestic crimes, had painted Chase as a concerned father, driven to desperation by being separated from his children. The narrative Hancock constructed was masterful in its simplicity. Hannah was an unstable woman who had kidnapped Chase's children and fled across state lines to prevent him from exercising his parental rights. Chase's presence at the hospital, his visits to the children's schools, even his possession of a key to Hannah's apartment, all of it was reframed as the reasonable actions of a father trying to locate his missing family. "It's going to be ugly," Rita had warned during one of their preparation sessions. "Hancock will try to paint you as the villain Hannah. He'll bring up every mistake you've ever made, every moment of weakness, every time you lost your temper or made a questionable decision. His job is to make you look like an unfit mother while making Chase look like a victim." "What about all the evidence we collected? The videos, the recordings, the documented pattern of stalking. All of that will be presented, but Hancock will have explanations for everything. Chase was trying to protect his children from an unstable mother. He was conducting legitimate welfare checks. He was exercising his rights as a concerned parent." The weeks leading up to the trial had been a masterclass in legal warfare. Hancock had filed motion after motion challenging the admissibility of evidence, questioning the credentials of expert witnesses, demanding psychiatric evaluations for Hannah, while painting Chase as a model citizen whose only crime was loving his children too much. But Rita and the prosecution team, led by District Attorney Maria Santos, had built their case methodically. They had hospital security footage of Chase's increasingly aggressive behavior. They had recordings of his threats. They had testimony from school officials about his inappropriate questioning. Most importantly, they had Hannah's own words delivered with the quiet strength of someone who had finally stopped running. The drive to the courthouse took place in unusual silence, with all 3 children understanding that this was not a day for normal conversation. Emma sat with a book in her lap, but never turned a page, while Jake held Rex with white-knuckled intensity. Marcus kept glancing at the adults, his 8-year-old radar detecting the tension that even careful parental reassurances couldn't disguise. "Will we be able to see you in there?" Emma asked as they pulled into the courthouse parking lot. No, sweetheart, Hannah replied. You'll stay with Ethan and Mrs. Patterson in a special waiting room while I talk to the judge. But I'll be thinking about you the whole time. What if the judge doesn't believe you? The question hung in the air like a physical weight. What if months of preparation and evidence and careful legal strategy weren't enough? What if Chase's money and connections and carefully constructed facade proved more convincing than the truth? Then we'll figure out what comes next, Ethan said, his voice steady despite the fear that threatened to overwhelm him. But Emma, I need you to remember something important. No matter what happens today, no matter what any judge decides, you and Jake and your mom are family now. Our family. And families protect each other. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters and photographers drawn by the sensational elements of the case that had captured local media attention. Stalker ex-husband trial begins, read the headline in the Millbrook Gazette, while the regional news stations had picked up the story as an example of domestic violence that crossed state lines. Hannah pulled her coat tighter as they navigated through the crowd, shielding the children from cameras, and shouted questions. Chase was already inside, surrounded by his legal team, and projecting the calm confidence of someone who had never doubted his ability to control any situation. The courtroom itself was smaller than Ethan had expected, wood-paneled and formal in a way that made every whisper seem amplified. Chase sat at the defendant's table in an expensive navy suit, his posture relaxed and his expression mildly concerned, as if he were attending a business meeting about someone else's problems. When their eyes met across the courtroom, Chase's expression didn't change, but Ethan caught something cold and calculating in his gaze. This was a man who had spent weeks planning his defense, preparing for this moment, when he would finally face the people who had dared to challenge his authority. Judge Margaret Thornfield entered with the kind of no-nonsense efficiency that suggested she had presided over too many domestic violence cases and had little patience for legal theatrics. She was in her late 50s, with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, and eyes that seemed to see through every carefully constructed argument to the truth beneath. This is the matter of People versus Chase Morrison, she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. The defendant is charged with harassment in the first-degree criminal trespassing, intimidation, and violation of a restraining order. How does the defendant plead? Bradley Hancock rose with practiced grace. Not guilty on all charges, Your Honor. My client is a devoted father who was driven to desperate measures by being unlawfully separated from his children. And so it began. District Attorney Santos opened with a methodical presentation of the evidence they had gathered, building a timeline of Chase's escalating behavior that painted a clear picture of stalking and intimidation. Security footage from the hospital showed Chase becoming increasingly agitated as staff refused to give him access to Hannah. Recordings of his threats played through speakers that made his reasonable tone somehow more menacing rather than less. The defendant presents himself as a concerned father, Santos told the jury. But his actions tell a different story. This is not a man seeking contact with his children through proper legal channels. This is a man who believes he owns his former family and will use any means necessary to maintain control over them. Hannah's testimony was the emotional centerpiece of the prosecution's case. For 2 hours, she detailed the progression of Chase's controlling behavior, from the early restrictions on her friendships to the final threats that had driven her to flee across state lines with her children. He didn't hit me, she said, her voice steady, despite the tears that threatened to fall. Chase was too smart for that. Physical violence leaves evidence that can be photographed and documented. Instead, he used psychological warfare. He isolated me from friends and family. He monitored my communications. He made me believe that I was crazy for feeling afraid. Hancock's cross-examination was brutal in its precision. He questioned every decision Hannah had made every moment when she could have called police or sought help through official channels. Why hadn't she filed for a restraining order sooner? Why had she taken the children across state lines without informing their father? Why had she been so determined to hide from a man who, according to legal documents, had never been charged with domestic violence? Isn't it true, Ms. Miller, that you were angry about the divorce settlement? That you felt my client had been awarded too much custody time with the children? No, that's not. Isn't it true that you deliberately moved to a state where my client would have difficulty exercising his parental rights? I moved to protect my children. From what exactly? From a father who loved them and wanted to be part of their lives. Hannah's composure finally cracked under the relentless questioning. From a man who treated us like property, she said, her voice rising with months of suppressed anger. From someone who couldn't accept that divorce meant he no longer owned us. Your Honor, Hancock said smoothly, I moved to strike the witness's emotional outburst as non-responsive. But Judge Thornfield was studying Hannah with shrewd eyes, and Ethan could see that the raw emotion in her voice had carried more weight than any carefully prepared statement. Chase's own testimony was a masterpiece of manipulation. He presented himself as a bewildered father who had awakened one morning to find his children simply gone with no forwarding address and no explanation beyond a brief note saying Hannah needed space to think. I was frantic, he said, his voice breaking with what sounded like genuine emotion. My children had disappeared, and I had no idea if they were safe. I hired investigators, I contacted police in multiple states. I did everything a concerned parent would do. He explained his presence at Hannah's workplace as a desperate attempt to ensure his children were receiving proper care. The key to her apartment had been given to him, he claimed, during their marriage for emergencies, and he had simply forgotten to return it during the chaos of their divorce. I admit I made mistakes, Chase said, looking directly at the jury with practiced sincerity. I was desperate to see my children, to know they were safe. Perhaps I was too aggressive in my approach, but everything I did was motivated by love and concern for Emma and Jake. Hancock's defense was built around the notion that Chase's behavior, while perhaps misguided, was the understandable response of a father separated from his children by a vindictive ex-wife. Every piece of evidence the prosecution presented was reframed through this lens. Surveillance became concern, threats became pleas for communication. Stalking became the natural behavior of a parent trying to locate missing children. The trial stretched across 3 days, with expert witnesses testifying about domestic violence patterns and the psychological impact of stalking on victims. Dr. Sarah Chen, a psychologist who specialized in domestic abuse cases, explained how controlling behavior escalated over time and why victims often delayed seeking help. Abusers like Mr. Morrison are skilled at maintaining plausible deniability, she testified. They choose tactics that can be explained away as reasonable behavior to outside observers while creating genuine terror in their victims. But Hancock's cross-examination was devastating. Dr. Chen, you've never actually evaluated my client, have you? Your testimony is based entirely on Ms. Miller's claims about his behavior. That's correct, but... So you have no first-hand knowledge of whether my client actually engaged in the behaviors you've described as typical of abusers. The pattern of behavior described is consistent with yes or no, doctor. Do you have any first-hand knowledge of my client's actual behavior? No. The prosecution's case was strong, but circumstantial, built on patterns and implications rather than smoking gun evidence. Chase had been careful never to make explicit threats, never to cross lines that would be undeniably criminal to outside observers. His stalking had been methodical and legal, his intimidation subtle and deniable. On the final day of testimony, something unexpected happened. Emma asked to speak to the judge. "I know I'm just a kid," she said, standing in the witness box with a composure that broke Ethan's heart. "But Jake and I are the ones everyone keeps talking about. We're the children who supposedly need our father. Don't we get to say what we want?" Judge Thornfield leaned forward, her stern expression softening slightly. "What would you like to tell me, Emma?" "I want to tell you about the last time I saw Chase before we moved away. He was angry because Mom had let me join the school orchestra without asking his permission first. He made me stand in our garage for 3 hours, practicing violin scales while he watched to make sure I didn't make any mistakes. When I finally played them perfectly, he said I was still being punished for not asking him before I auditioned." The courtroom was completely silent as Emma continued, her young voice carrying across the room with devastating clarity. "He told me that everything I did reflected on him, that I wasn't allowed to make decisions without his approval because I belonged to him. Those were his exact words. 'You belong to me, Emma. You and your brother and your mother all belong to me, and don't you forget it.'" Emma looked directly at Chase for the first time since entering the courtroom, and Ethan could see her father's confident facade finally beginning to crack. "He never hit us," she continued, "but he didn't have to. He made us afraid of making him angry, afraid of doing anything that might disappoint him. That's not love. That's ownership." Hancock objected to a child's testimony being admitted without proper psychological evaluation, but Judge Thornfield overruled him with a sharp look that suggested she'd heard enough legal maneuvering for one trial. The closing arguments felt anticlimactic after Emma's testimony. Santos summarized the evidence methodically, building her case piece by piece, while Hancock made one final attempt to paint Chase as a victim of circumstance and judicial overreach. But the damage was done. Emma's words had cut through all the legal positioning and expert testimony to reveal the simple truth: Chase Morrison was not a loving father separated from his children, but a controlling abuser who had terrorized his family until they were forced to flee for their safety. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, their faces were grim with the weight of the decision they'd been forced to make. On the charge of harassment in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of criminal trespassing, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of intimidation, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of violation of a restraining order, we find the defendant guilty. Chase's reaction was immediate and telling. The mask of reasonable concern finally slipped completely, revealing the cold fury beneath. He turned toward Hannah with an expression of such naked hatred that bailiffs immediately moved to restrain him. "This isn't over," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the courtroom despite the chaos around him. "You can't keep my children from me forever, Hannah. I'll find another way." "Mr. Morrison," Judge Thornfield said with ice in her voice, "you are in contempt of court. Bailiffs removed the defendant immediately." The sentencing hearing took place 2 weeks later. Judge Thornfield sentenced Chase to 3 years in state prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation with a permanent restraining order prohibiting any contact with Hannah, Emma, or Jake. "Mr. Morrison," she said, as she delivered the sentence, "you have used the legal system and your considerable resources to terrorize a woman and her children. You have shown no remorse for your actions, and based on your outburst following the verdict, represent a continued threat to your former family. This court will ensure that threat is neutralized." As Chase was led away in handcuffs, still insisting that he was the victim of a massive miscarriage of justice, Hannah finally allowed herself to cry, not tears of fear or desperation, but tears of relief so profound they seemed to wash away months of accumulated terror. The months that followed were a revelation in what normal life could feel like. Emma and Jake returned to their schools without looking over their shoulders, joined extracurricular activities, made friends with the easy confidence of children who no longer expected their happiness to be stolen without warning. Hannah's apartment remained empty. She had formally moved into Ethan's house 3 weeks after the trial, bringing with her the belongings that mattered, and leaving behind everything that carried memories of fear. The transition felt natural rather than rushed, like puzzle pieces finally finding their proper places. Marcus embraced his role as big brother with the serious dedication he brought to everything important in his life. He taught Jake to ride a bicycle, helped Emma with her math homework, and declared regularly that his family was way more interesting now that it included people who understood the difference between velociraptors and Deinonychus. One evening in late spring, nearly a year after that first awkward date that had changed everything, Ethan found Hannah in the backyard watching the children play in the elaborate treehouse that had become a summer-long construction project. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, settling beside her on the porch swing they'd installed the previous month. "I was thinking about that night," I whispered. "My kids are in the car," she replied, leaning into his shoulder with the easy comfort of someone who no longer expected disaster to arrive without warning. "I thought I was ruining your evening, bringing chaos into your peaceful life. And now I think maybe chaos was exactly what my peaceful life needed." From the treehouse came the sound of elaborate negotiations about whether dinosaurs could have lived in outer space, a debate that had raged for several days and showed no signs of resolution. Emma was taking the position that scientific evidence didn't support extraterrestrial dinosaurs, while Jake maintained that absence of evidence wasn't evidence of absence, and Marcus had appointed himself as mediator in the dispute. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't answered the door that night?" Ethan asked. "Every day," Hannah replied. "But then I remember that you did answer it. You saw 3 strangers who needed help, and you didn't hesitate to provide it. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are." "What about who we are, all of us together?" Hannah turned to look at him directly, her blue eyes bright with the kind of happiness she'd forgotten was possible. "We're home," she said simply. "For the first time in years, we're finally home." The engagement happened 6 months later during a family camping trip, where Ethan proposed with a ring hidden inside Jake's dinosaur collection. The wedding took place the following spring in Ethan's backyard, surrounded by friends and neighbors who had watched their unconventional family come together through crisis and emerge stronger than any of them could have imagined. Emma served as maid of honor. Jake was the ring bearer who insisted Rex should also have a role in the ceremony, and Marcus delivered a best man speech that reduced most of the guests to tears with its 8-year-old wisdom about how families weren't just about being related, but about choosing to love each other every day. Chase Morrison served his full sentence without parole. Upon his release, he violated the restraining order within 6 months and was returned to prison for an additional 2 years. Hannah had been right about one thing: men like Chase didn't change, didn't learn, didn't accept defeat gracefully. But they also couldn't destroy what they didn't understand. Chase had seen his family as property to be owned and controlled. But the Walker family was built on something he couldn't comprehend: the voluntary choice to protect and support each other, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Years later, when Emma graduated valedictorian of her high school class, and Jake received a full scholarship to study paleontology, and Marcus published his first children's book about the adventures of a magic dinosaur named Rex, they would all remember that October evening when Hannah whispered, "My kids are in the car," and changed everything. They would remember not because it was the night their old life ended, but because it was the night their real life began. The night they learned that sometimes the most important family isn't the one you're born into, but the one that opens its door when you need shelter from the storm. And they would remember most of all that love isn't about possession or control or the right to own someone else's choices. Love is about showing up when someone needs you, standing together against whatever threatens to tear you apart, and choosing each other again and again every single day. In the end, that was the victory that mattered most. Not the trial verdict, or the prison sentence, or the legal vindication, but the simple truth that Hannah and Emma and Jake had found their way home. Home to a place where children could laugh without looking over their shoulders, where mothers could sleep without listening to footsteps in the night, where family meant safety instead of fear. Home to a man who had opened his door to strangers and discovered they weren't strangers at all, but the missing pieces of a life he hadn't even realized was incomplete. Home to forever.